ladies and gentlemen, like I said, we are incredibly privileged to have the speakers that we have today. So I'll introduce our speakers and then they will kick off. Just to give you a sense of how today will go, really. We have our speakers who will speak for 10 to 15 minutes each, sharing their insights on a number of topics. And some of the key topics that we'll be covering would include definitions of a crisis. Because one of the things that we are mindful of within this organization, ITWLA, International Third World Leaders Association, is that we are careful to use definitions that we all understand, because it's very possible to use the same words, but when you're using a word, it means different things to different people. So we will anchor very, very closely on ensuring that we all have the same understanding when we're using the words crisis. What do we mean? Because what can be a crisis to one person may not necessarily be a crisis to someone else. So we will address the definitions of a crisis. Then we'll look at the basics on how to identify and control crisis situations. Then we'll also look at how to detect situations that may cause and predict a crisis. And our speakers, will address these topics, very, very strongly. So the first speaker we would have is Myles Munroe Jr., popularly known to family and friends as Chiro. So Myles Jr. is currently the CEO and president of Munroe Global. Munroe Global, is that correct? Yes, Munroe Global. He's also the chairman of the board for the International Third World Leaders Association, who are hosting this event today. He has a heart for and enjoys training leaders and future leaders to discover and fulfill their true potential. His purpose and passion is grounded firmly on providing advancement opportunities to equip people to live their best lives. He's a visionary leader with a mind to create strategies that fulfill the vision that he has been given. Myles is a serial entrepreneur, and he also serves as the president of Munroe Group of Companies. These family-run organizations are organizations he's been overseeing for more than 10 years. His character, vision, and creativity continues to expand as he adapts to life's many changes. And his mantra in life really is that the only constant in life is change. Now, by the very nature of his name, most of us would know that he's the offspring of a global leadership statesman who has mentored many of us within the International Third World Leaders Organization, the late Dr. Myles Munroe, and his wonderful wife, Pastor Ruth Munroe. So, Myles Munroe is our chairman of the International Third World Leaders Association, and he will be kicking us off with a welcome. The other speaker that you can see on your screen at the moment is Dr. Jide-David Modede. He is the CEO of Flying High Consulting and a number of other phenomenal organizations. He's a leadership consultant who has offered consultancy services to many nations, many organizations around the world. Nations such as Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria, in the UK. In fact, he was recently given a fellowship by the University of West Scotland. So he's not just a practical leader who brings information, he's also an erudite academic who is recognized for his leadership expertise around the world. Now we'll also be having another speaker who will be joining us shortly, Dr. Joseph Ripley, who is the founder and senior pastor of Body of Christ Church International, based in Atlanta, Georgia. And when he joins us, I'll do a bit more about his introductions. So for now, it is my distinct pleasure and privilege to invite Dr. Myles Munroe Jr. to kick us off with his welcome address. Thank you.
Thank you, Yemi. Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Like I was saying earlier, I'm so excited that we finally kicking off our ITWLA Digital series. This is something that we have been planning for quite some time, and we want to welcome everyone from all around the world. We currently have over 100 people that have joined us and that are listening to us right now. Again, I'm so excited. Thank you guys for just being a part of this entire event. Thank you for spending your time with us this morning. I just want to share some thoughts on the ITWLA and our organization. ITWLA was the International Third World Leaders Association, was birthed to respond to the need for effective leadership training and development in emerging development nations. Our motto is transforming followers into leaders and leaders into agents of change. Our focus is national development through leadership training. We have a vision to establish a global network of leaders from every discipline committed to the highest standards of excellence in leadership. Our mission is to positively influence the destiny of developing third world nations. We have a purpose to provide transformational solutions in response to the dynamic leadership needs of the emerging developing nations. Our goal, our ultimate goal, is to produce leaders that empower their people and their nation. You know, this organization was founded over 20 years ago, and the individuals that founded it, along with my dad, all of them had one goal in mind, and that was to produce leaders out of developing nations. You know, we're all connected in some way through some line of history, and we want to really extend that and expand on that connection. First, as developing nations, you know, individuals who've had similar development through the countries that we grew up in, through the nations that we are a part of. And we want to expand that into the future where we become the developers, we become the trainers. And that's exactly what this organization is about. This organization has individuals that are a part of it from all parts of the world. You know, we're talking the United States, Canada, Europe, the UK, the Caribbean, the Bahamas, of course, England, Australia, Papua New Guinea. We have individuals that are a part of our organization from all around the world. And I want to encourage you to become a part of this organization. Like I said, we are focused on leadership training, really developing the individual, right? Pulling out of every individual the leadership or the leader that we know they are. The development of the leadership, of the development of the person. We're focused on that because we want everyone to really be the best leader that they can be. We're all born to lead, and we've taken the mantle of developing the leader in you. So I want to encourage you, once again, if you just hearing about this organization, or if you've heard about this organization but you haven't become a part of it as yet, join us today. Join us as we further develop ourselves, as we expand as an organization, and as we continue to develop leaders in emerging nations. So today, like I said, we're kicking off our first inaugural digital series, our ITWLA Digital Series. Crazy enough, we're living in a world that we aren't allowed to move around like we used to, right? Everyone has been secluded to their home at some point. If you're not still secluded to your home right now, us here in the Bahamas, we're under a lockdown. So we aren't allowed to travel. We aren't allowed to go out on the roads as much as we used to just a week ago. And I know I'm sure a lot of you in other parts of the world, if you're not on a lockdown, you're on a curfew, or you're in a different type of world now. And it forces us to adapt. It forces us to adjust our way of living. And that's kind of what we want to discuss today, right? The theme for this first digital series that we're doing is crisis management. What do you do when crisis happens? How do you prepare for crisis? How do you manage crisis? How do we come out on the other end of the crisis? And that's what myself and the speakers that you see or you will see before you today, and the many speakers that will come, you know, in the weeks to follow. We plan on continuing this series over the next few months. It's going to be a 4-part series, and I'm so excited. And once again, thank you for joining. So today I want to get started. I'm going to introduce the topic. Like I said, we're discussing crisis management, and my duty today is to bring a definition of crisis for you. So I'll get right to it. The first thing that I want to mention is I want to really define what a crisis is. So a crisis, the definition of crisis is any situation, circumstance, condition, or event, whether unexpected or out of your control, that leads to an unstable or dangerous situation that affects an individual, a group, a community, a society, or an environment, or your life even, over which, like I said, you have no control over. So once again, a crisis is any situation, circumstance, condition, or event, whether unexpected or out of your control, that leads to an unstable or dangerous situation that affects an individual, a group, a community, a society, or an environment. I think we're in the perfect time right now to explain what a crisis is. You know, this global pandemic that we're experiencing, it wasn't expected. No one really saw this coming, you know, and even if someone saw this coming or someone expected it, sort of expected it, no one could have predicted it would have snowballed into what it is today. You know, this virus started in China, and it has spread to all parts of the world. We are all being affected, and it just shows how interconnected this globe is now. And I think when we're talking about crisis, we have to speak on crisis on a global level, because that's how crisis is affecting all of us. Now, not all crises are global, right? There are many types of crises. We have personal crisis, we have professional crisis. There are a lot of crises that we can experience as human beings, as individuals. The various types of crises that we can experience is as simple as a loss of your home, a loss of your car, the death of a family member or a loved one, a loss of your job, a loss of your business, a deterioration of your health or the health of a loved one, a divorce that you may go through, an unexpected pregnancy that you find it hard to deal with, a drug addiction, whether personal or by a loved one. So there are a lot of crises that we can experience. All of these things are crises, you know, and some of them are things that are out of our control, things that are unexpected, but are things that we must be able to adjust and adapt to, because the only constant in life is change. You know, that's a motto that I live by. That's a motto that I've really laid my foundation on, right? I'm the type of person, especially now, you know, I think a lot of individuals really know my story and know where I've come from, you know, over the past 5 years. 2014, I had the biggest crisis I could have ever had, you know, as an individual. I lost both of my parents. And I think that going through that situation, it's really prepared me, even though I may have felt that like I wasn't prepared for it right now. I think I know the preparation that I was going through even before that time, and even now through this time. So any future crisis that I experience, I understand that, you know, it's something that I can't control. It's going to be unexpected. And the thing that I must do is be able to adjust and be able to adapt to the constant changes that we experience in life. You know, crisis is no respecter of person. Crisis happens to everyone. We are all going to experience some form of crisis. You know, I just gave you a list of examples of crisis that we can experience, and I'm sure that you can add your example of crisis to that list. You know, we're all going to go through crisis at some point in our lives. But the good thing is, crisis does not last forever. There's always an end to it. There's always a season that we're going to go through hard times, but we're always going to come through that season. You know, if you look at the 4 seasons that we experience throughout the year, you know, we go from winter, spring, to summer, to fall, right? We have no control over when the season comes. We have no control over how bad the season gets. You know, we can't control how hot it gets in the summer. We can't control how cold it gets in the winter. but we must adjust. We must adapt our lives and the way that we move and live in the environment to make ourselves a bit more comfortable regardless of the season that we experience. So that's the basic definition of exactly what a crisis is. It's something that I think we all should be able to understand, because like I said, we've all experienced crisis at some point in our lives. Even if you haven't experienced crisis as yet, or if you don't think you've experienced crisis as yet, expect it to happen. Crisis is going to happen. And the purpose of this series is one, the goal is to really encourage all of us, right? To understand, one, that there are things that we can control on this earth and things that we can't control. Those things that we can't control, the best thing that we can do is prepare for them. I'm encouraging you to as you listen to us today, and as you listen to us in the coming weeks, as we discuss these topics of crisis management, really take notes, really take what we're saying to heart. These are going to be some key principles that I feel you'll be able to apply to your lives. We want to give you the information that you need. We hope that you would get the understanding of this information, you'll be able to comprehend it, because my wish is that you'll be able to apply the wisdom that that you'll be hearing to your personal life, or into the lives of your family members, or to your business life, to your professional life, so that you can be successful and you can be prepared for anything that you can possibly experience in the world today. So, you know, that's pretty much my time, or what I wanted to say. I just want to leave with this note. Even though crisis is no respecter of person, and it happens to everyone, the good thing is, like I said, crisis does not last forever. So the key to overcoming crisis, or the key to making it through a crisis, is outlasting the crisis, because it's only temporary. Regardless of if you think your crisis is going to last a few days, a few weeks, a few years, there is an end period. And I hope, and my wish is that throughout this series, we're able to give you key principles that allows you to make it through any crisis that you can experience. I want to encourage you to ask questions. We have a question and answer period coming up later. So I want you to, there's a question box if you're joining us through Zoom. Give us your questions. We want to engage, we want to interact with you. We want to make sure that we give you all the information that you would need to make it out of any crisis that you can experience. Okay, so I hope that I've laid a good foundation and gave you a basic definition of what a crisis is, and we'll be going furthermore into our topic of crisis management. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's certainly a bit of a barnstormer, as we say here in the UK, for starting us off on this forum. There are quite a number of key nuggets that I picked from just that very short session that Myles shared with us. And I think it's exceptionally important, and I would recommend highly that everyone, if you didn't think you needed to, that you actually make the effort to take some notes. Because there are sometimes when I've attended some events and I think, oh, well, I know the subject, I know how to handle crisis. After all, I'm 40, 30, 50 years old. If there ain't anything I haven't dealt with, what can they teach me? And you think, oh, I don't need to take notes. But I think you will find out that, you know, by the time we finish today, there are some gems and nuggets of wisdom that will flow forth. And someone once said that the shortest pencil is more powerful than the greatest memory. So I would encourage you, take notes, capture some of the essence of what we are discussing today, and they will stand you in good stead for the days ahead. So thank you so much for that, Chira. I mean, you were very, very on point there when you said that every crisis is temporary. You know, all of us here on this platform today were part of the story that you shared briefly about the situation with your parents. And I can imagine when that situation happened, it was almost as if our entire world folded in on itself. And it seemed like, you know, it was so dark, you know, we'd never be able to come out of it. But you made such a powerful point that as dark as that was, you know, it was a temporary situation. And your parents had prepared you for any potential eventuality. And sometimes we don't recognize the preparation that is going on in our lives that would actually position us to be able to handle crisis. And therefore, I would again recommend to everyone that whatever you have been through up until this point, no matter what it seems like, good, bad, or ugly, take it as preparation that is positioning you for the future, that is positioning you to handle even bigger situations that may come your way in the future. So thank you so much. I love the idea that, you know, we can only adjust or adapt to the seasons of life. We can't change the summer, we can't change the winter, we can't change the rainy season or the dry season. You don't try and oppose or hinder change. Change will happen with or without you. The key is how quickly or how well do we adapt to change and how do we adjust to it. So thank you so much for those fantastic leadership tips, Chair. Really appreciate it. So our next speaker will be sharing with us on, sorry, let me just make sure I have my notes here. Okay, we'll be sharing with us on the basics on how to identify and control crisis situations. And this will be by Dr. Joseph Ripley. He's a man of God, indeed. He's, I think, he's probably one of the most connected people that I know on the planet. You know, he's a very, very humble gentleman. When you sit with him and he begins to tell you, oh, I was with this person, I was with that person, and you're thinking, my goodness, you know, he is a leader of leaders. I just share a bit about his bio. Like I said, he is the founder and pastor of Body of Christ Church International, which is a non-denominational church. His mission is to purposefully extend service-oriented leadership, demonstrating Christ-likeness in all areas of human experience, personal, domestic, corporate, and cultural, producing kingdom covenant results. Dr. Ripley is a trustee of the International Third World Leadership Association. He is also the regional ambassador for Southern USA. He was recently conferred with the appointment of Ambassador Statesman to the United Nations by Word of Life Ministries International, a non-governmental organization with special status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. Dr. Ripley can be seen and heard nationally and internationally on the Living in Victory broadcast via television and the internet, where he teaches people from all walks of life to feed their faith and starve their doubts. I like that. So Dr. Ripley and his wife, Dr. Majanita Ripley, are the proud parents of 3 children, April, Heather, and Joseph Jr. And I can tell you, having met his daughter, April, that he's not just a leader of leaders, he's a father of leaders. So Dr. Ripley, welcome. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yemi. Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman, and all of my fellow presenters. JD, God bless you. And choice kingdom greetings to all of our ITWLA family that's tuned in. And perhaps there's a few friends that may not be a part of the organization yet, but you're on board, and we're grateful for that. And I thank you so much for what has preceded my segment here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your presentation. You've certainly done an excellent job at letting us know specifically what crisis is. And you certainly have the experience and unique background of going through a number of crises. At, shall I say, a relatively young age, you've certainly seen some serious crises. And I like the points that you brought out, and I just wanted to kind of dovetail off of what you said, and then I will present sort of orderly fashion of dealing with these crises and identifying them, and what can we do to mitigate the impact that crises have on us. You brought out a tremendous point. Crisis, number one, is common in life. Everybody has crisis. There are no exceptions. Even when the Lord Jesus came here, he faced some crises, all right? And he showed us how to face them and come out of them, as it were. Crisis is normal to life. It's a part of life. It visits every person, every family, every community, every business. No one can live in this life on this earth without crisis. But here's the good news. Crisis is not failure. It's just a process. I'll say that again. Crisis is not a failure. It's just a process. I've heard sometimes people in dealing with things, they say, well, you know, that person is a failure or that person is a success. Neither one of those are people. Those are events that happen in people's lives. So when crises come, it's not, you know, it's not a time for whether or not you're ready or not. Ready or not, there's the crisis. Now you're going to have to begin to deal with it. And believe it or not, even when a crisis comes, the one true freedom we all have in humanity is choice. We can, listen, we can stand our ground or we can run and head for the hills. You always have that choice available to you. Choice is the one true freedom that all human beings have. It doesn't matter what government you're living under. It doesn't matter the environmental conditions or any of those things. You have a choice. And when crisis confronts you, the best choice to make is, I'm going to face this and I'm going to come through this. Right quick, I just want to give a scriptural reference because my presentation is definitely going to come somewhat from a faith-based perspective. And I want to turn our attention to 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13. The Message translation says this: no test or temptation that comes your way is beyond the course of what others have had to face. All you need to remember is that God will never let you down. He'll never let you be pushed past your limit. He will always be there to help you come through it. And it's very important. Entire ITWLA family, I wish every human being on earth knew that passage of scripture and grasped that passage of scripture and made it a part of their core belief system, because it would certainly mitigate what I would call the initial shock of crises when it presents itself. As the chairman said just a few minutes ago, look, everybody is going to deal with crisis. We all face it. That comes with the territory. Another thing, Jesus put it this way in John 16:33. He said, now in the world, that's where we live, you will have tribulation. That's trouble. Now, somebody once said to me when I just spoke that scripture, they said, well, wait a minute, man, that's a negative confession. I said, well, you put Jesus that. I said, that's the truth telling the truth, because Jesus is the truth. So what did he say? In the world, you will have tribulation. But he didn't leave you there tribulating. He said, be of good cheer. My translation of that is, have a good attitude. Keep a good attitude. Why? Because Jesus said, I have overcome the world. So the worst that the world could throw at us, Jesus dealt with it. He said, I've already overcome it. That's a done deal. And that's true to this day. How do I know? He's the same yesterday and today and forever. Remember that Christ in you, the hope of glory. So Christ is living on the inside of you through the person of the Holy Spirit. So you have all that he has. And that's wonderful. All the wonderful things he's made to us. He's made wisdom, righteousness, sanctification, redemption. All these are important components that help us to deal with crises when, not if, but when it comes into our life. Let me say this also. Crises brings chaos, calamity, and confusion. Listen, this is true. We're in the middle of a global crisis, all right? With the COVID-19 virus that's affecting all over the world. One way or another, every human being on this planet is directly or indirectly affected by this crisis we call the pandemic of COVID-19. In the United States, we've been going through a series of social unrest in our cities. There have been demonstrations and protests. Perhaps many of you have seen that on the worldwide news and things of that nature. So that's another layer of crisis on top of the virus. Then, of course, here we are getting ready to get back into the school. And there's a crisis there also. There's a big tug of war going on in the States because some parents say, look, I want my kids totally virtual in their learning process. And other parents said, I want them in the classroom. I need them out of the house. We got to go to work. Hey, there's a tug of war. In other words, on both sides of that equation, there's crisis. Everybody is in a crisis. The people that want their kids into school, the people that want their kids home. And yet it's going to create crises. And that's why Jesus said, be of good cheer. There's the key. Keep a good attitude. I mean, the Lord just puts it so simply. In the world, you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. The challenge is, Jesus said another thing. He said, you need to come and learn of me. That's the challenge. We need to learn of him. There's a lot of other learning we need to do, but we certainly need to learn of him because then that way he'll show us how to deal with crises. Crises tests almost every skill set in the human corporality, spirit, soul, and body. I mean, your totality will be tested in a crisis situation. You're going to be, look at what Jesus did. Remember the Mount of Temptation? That was a crisis. And what happened? The devil comes along and says, look, if you're the Son of God, turn these stones, command these stones be made bread. That was the test in his flesh. And then he said, nobody knows you around here. So look, the devil puts him on the pinnacle of the temple. He said, now jump down. The angels will catch you. But the Lord said, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. That was a test of the soul to see how proud he was. And then finally, the devil says, look, you know what? All these kingdoms I'll give you in their glory. And by the way, that's a genuine temptation. He said, all you have to do is bow down and worship me. That was the ultimate test. That was the test in the spirit. It was all crises. The test in the flesh, test in the soul, test in the spirit. And Jesus passed all the tests. How did he do it? And that's what we want to take away today. As we deal with, identify, and understand how to manage crisis. The solution is, he spoke the word. He said, it is written in all three situations. The attack that came in the flesh, or the test that came in the flesh, the test that came into the soul, that's your mind, your will, where you decide and choose, and your emotions, which are designed for us to express. Never let your emotions control you. That's the cart before the horse. You'll never get anywhere like that. And then the ultimate test in his spirit. Bow down and worship me, he says. And I will give you these kingdoms and all their glory. He's talking about the kingdoms of men. The thing is, they already belong to Jesus. So but it was a genuine temptation because the devil is the God of this world, not the God of the heavens and the earth, but the God of this world. So he was in his, shall I say, he was in his authority to make that offer. If it wasn't a genuine temptation, then Jesus would never have responded to it, but he did. So the takeaway secret there is Jesus hit him with the word, the one offensive piece in our entire armor. Okay, I got to watch myself. I get to preach a little bit too, but I want to be instructing here. So understand that we need to anchor ourselves, okay? Anchor ourselves in God's word when facing crisis, when it comes. Now, moving right along, humanity has witnessed crises almost continually. Since we started occupying this planet, crisis has been here. That was a crisis back in the Garden of Eden because they left there. What a beautiful place, but they left there. That created a crisis, all right? You know, crisis follows us through all the developmental stages of our lives. We're born into the world. We come in crying. Did you notice that? No, you don't even remember that. You see. And then the move from infancy to adolescence, that was a crisis. Go from adolescence into adulthood, another crisis. And to go from, quote, the single life to the married life, for those of you that are there, another crisis. And then children, you bring them into the world. Oh my goodness, another crisis. I don't mean to say that all those things are negative. I'm just simply saying that they present challenges to you, often that you have never faced, or maybe you didn't have that much instruction. Say, gee, what do I do right now with this? But that's why I say crisis is normal life. It's common. So listen, as I said again, when crisis occurs, it's too late to wonder whether you're ready for it or not. I want to use as an illustration very quickly in my time remaining, a systematic way of identifying and managing crisis, okay? And I'm going to use the example of something that occurred here in the United States back in 2005. Her name was Katrina, big hurricane. Now, I know they're in the Caribbean nations, and I'm sure in the UK, where Yemi and JD are, and probably all over the world, there's some kind of thing that happens. There are meteorological crises. They're called typhoons. They're called hurricanes. They're called tornadoes. They're called monsoons, earthquakes, all these natural disasters. And what do? They come, they don't give you any notice. That, you may be able to predict that they're coming, but they're coming. It's not like, they're waiting on an invitation or a decline. They're going to manifest themselves. And all that we can do is our best to be ready in that situation. Let me talk about the stages of dealing with crisis. Number one, and I noticed this even with COVID-19, there's a stage of denial. There's a lot of people, even now, they still don't believe that. They think this is a government manufactured thing where maybe some consortium or conspiratorial thing has happened. Maybe the G20 guys did it. Who knows who did it? Hey, who manufactured this bug and turned it loose on us? And so you got a lot of people still in denial. But I want to tell you something here. The body bags are not lying. The funerals are not lying. Those are real things. And I know this directly. All right. We know people directly that have been impacted by the virus, and we know people indirectly that have been impacted by it. And so I keep telling my congregation, and anytime I have a public forum like this, I'm gonna remind you. I think the 3 W's is what we call it. All right. And that is wear your mask, wash your hands, and watch your distance. Now that's about as basic as it can be. No one can say that that's a 100% guarantee against contracting infection or whatever, but it is a start to help mitigate the spread of it, and that's a good thing. So denial, which is the assumption, I think that speaks for itself. The assumption is the lowest level of knowledge you could ever live life on. When you assume something, you need to know what's going on. The assumption that the problem is not necessarily that bad. That's what's going on right now. There's a lot of people, man, this is no big deal. I look out and people are going about their business, doing this, that, the other. And because they've adopted an attitude that, well, so what? I've got to live. And so they just sort of shove the crisis issue to the wayside. But nevertheless, people say it can't be that bad. It doesn't happen here. It's happening everywhere. Okay. So that's a very important thing. But one of the marks of good leadership, and that's a part of what this forum is being put on to do. Not only are we defining crisis and we're talking about what it looks like and what it brings into our lives, but we need to talk about, okay, how do we confront this? What do we do as leaders? This is the Third World Leaders Association. How do we deal with this as leaders? One of the marks of good leadership is to dispense with denial quickly. Remember Jesus said, agree with your adversary while you're in the way with it and do it quickly. Don't delay, don't procrastinate. So let's deal with this denial thing quickly and face the hard issues with eyes wide open and a determined attitude. Good leaders also define reality. They set direction and they inspire people to move forward. Even in this pandemic, one thing I have to say, there's been some mixed messages that's been coming from our governmental leadership. Today it's this, tomorrow it's another thing, the week after that it's something different. But the bottom line is, the ultimate goal is you got to define the reality of this situation, and you've got to inspire the people and motivate them to move forward. One option we don't have here in the United States, or any other country for that matter, is to just stand still and play dead. We can't do that. Listen, God is our manufacturer. He made all of us on purpose with a purpose. So we have to fulfill that purpose. We got to move forward with it. So that's very important as leaders, that we inspire the people to keep moving forward and not stop and mark down. Number two, dealing with the crisis is containment. Containment plays out in one of two forms. Got to watch out for this. Leaders either try to keep the matter quiet or they engage in buck passing, all right? Passing the buck. And listen to me, issues always find their way to the surface. That's the reason why, stuff is coming out now about all kinds of things in the media and so forth and so on. Just get in the way with this thing, call it what it is, call a spade, and let's get busy about trying to find a pathway to a solution for it. But buck passing is where problems disappear by giving it to somebody else to solve. That's not going to solve it. I'm not against delegation. Delegation is very, very important. Delegate things that need to be delegated to the people qualified to sustain that scope of operation and approach to what's going on. In the case of Katrina, for example, since I'm using that as an example, the blame game was definitely going on. Here you got a Category 5 storm bearing down on New Orleans and Louisiana. And everybody's wondering what's going to do. The state and the city are crying, hey, we need some help. Feds, help us. The feds say, you got to invite us to come in. I mean, it just went around and around in a circle. And Katrina was still coming in. You saw the pictures, people on their rooftops, folks swimming for their lives. It was horrible. And all of that was avoidable. It was avoidable. Now, storm's not avoidable, but the strategy to deal with and address the storm was completely within the control of folk. You can't control a volcanic eruption or an earthquake or any other natural disaster. Controlling those things that's not going to happen. Now, there are crises that can happen on a personal level, a family level, a community level. You may have a greater scope of control in those things. But with these other kinds of crises, you may not. Sometimes even in those, you can feel like you've lost control or you're out of control, and you just got to come to the place where you come to yourself and say, you know what, we're going to deal with this. The third stage in dealing with that crisis, again, and it's a little related to the second point I made there, is blaming and shaming. All the parties with a stake in the problem get into a frantic state of self-defense, assigning blame and some claiming credit for this, that, and the other. And it's very sad. Strong leadership avoids this nonsensical behavior. And instead, they quickly and boldly define the problem, outline a plan of action, and execute it. That's the way you have to go after crisis. The crisis will not back off. There's no reasoning with the crisis. Listen, it doesn't know any of our languages. All it knows is it's there and it does what it does. Thank God, I think Chairman said, or Yemi, I think you said this, hey, it didn't come here to stay. It always comes to pass. That's the biblical principle. Nothing comes to stay. Listen, there's a time and a season, Ecclesiastes says, for everything under the sun. That means it has a shelf life, my brothers and sisters. It has a beginning and it has an end. It's not here to stay forever. It's coming to pass. We have to deal with it season after season after season. Winter, spring, summer, and fall. All you have to do is call on the name of the Lord. Praise God. So number 4, and I'm moving right along, is what I call the scapegoat stage. Watch out for this. In just about every crisis, including this pandemic or any other crisis that are going on in any of the nations of the world right now, there's always somebody that has to be the fall guy. Somebody's got to fall on the sword, as they say. Heads have to roll. And they're looking for somebody to blame ultimately. And because people have this need to know that someone is going to pay the price for whatever happened. Now, nobody, listen, let me put it this way. I know we've identified the fact that the virus originated out of China, okay? But the virus is a virus. And it's hard to kind of fix the blame. They'll be trying to investigate that for decades, but it's there, all right? So, you know, you have to watch out about that. But people always want to know somebody's going to pay the price. So heads roll. Now, in the case of Katrina, the Federal Emergency Management Administrator, I think his name was Mr. Brown, he was fired. The chief of police in New Orleans was fired because apparently he did not respond in a timely way or give orders in a civil emergency like that to put people out of harm's way and get them to safety. So there was, shall I say, a little bloodletting there. Finally, you got to get the crisis fixed. This is my final point. You've got to get the crisis fixed. Despite naysayers, life goes on. There's people, listen, I understand the prophetic scriptures. We're definitely on God's prophetic timeline. No matter what we do or don't do, no matter what's happening around us or whatever, God has his own timetable. No man knows the day or the hour. But the Bible says, be ye also ready, whatever happens. And so at the end of the day, we have to get this crisis situation fixed. Now, we're laboring on that where the virus is concerned. We're laboring on that where social unrest is concerned. But you also ought to be laboring on it in your own personal life. What personal crises are you facing? Are you dealing with an addiction? Are you dealing with some other issue in your personal and private life? What about the family? Are there issues there? You want to move toward getting the problem fixed. So life goes on, and hopefully for the better. Now, history shows us that crisis almost always gives way to something better. And I want to tell you something. You always have something to look forward to, and the best is yet to come. Yes, when crisis comes and puts us through all these tests and whatnot, it usually yields to something better. Look, when 9/11 happened, everybody was screaming and complaining. Oh my goodness, they're checking my luggage, they're checking my person, they're rubbing me down, they're doing this and that. They want my cane, they think it's a weapon. Can't they see I'm in a wheelchair? Why do I have to go through all these changes? Well, you know what? Along the way of that inconvenience, which was the way of the world trying to combat a crisis. And here you go. They identified a crisis, and here was the way that they were going to avoid this thing happening again. So that's the reason why you got all the metal detection devices, the body scanners, and all that. And they do profiling in some nations of the world to prevent another crisis of that nature happening again. And it went system-wide. The airports, the way you do now, you got all these badges. People have to go through vetting processes and all that. Look at all the good stuff that came out of it. Now, you know, we would have loved not to have gone through the inconveniences, and we're still going through them. But you know what? I think you'd agree it's a fair trade for your safety. It's a good, fair trade for your well-being, as opposed to the alternative, which is unthinkable. So get focused on fixing the aftermath of the crisis. The crisis is going to come through. Okay, so after you get through with the crisis, have you surveyed the damage? Where you're going from there? Look at what's there and look at what you have. Don't just look at what you lost, look at what you have left. If you have you, that is an incredible, potentially power-packed resource because you've been manufactured by God, made in his image and after his likeness. That doesn't matter where we put you, you will happen. And that's the goodness of God. I'm running out of time. I've run out of time. Thank you. No problem.
Dr. Ripley, thank you so, so much. My goodness, that is absolutely brilliant. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as I trust that you're soaring on the wings of wisdom right now, just like I am. I've been just, taking so many notes. So if you see me kind of leaning across, I'm just getting another piece of paper just to write some more notes. So it's just getting so exciting. And I've just been following some of the messages that I left on the chat. Please, may I remind you, if you have a question, use the Q&A function. It's a lot easier for us to get the questions from the Q&A function because there's so many comments on the chat. To try and wade through all of those comments to get through to your question is slightly tricky. So please, if you have a question, if you've put a question in the chat, please do try and rewrite it and put it in the question and answer section, then we can get to it. Because I know that there are quite a number of people from all over the world. I noticed that people from Bangladesh, from Toronto, from the United Kingdom, from the United States, from the Bahamas. So there are many people all around the world. So we welcome you again. If you're joining us probably just a short moment ago, we've been having a wonderful time. We spent almost an hour, and it's just been so rich listening to the wisdom that's been flowing forth from first our chairman, Myles Munroe Jr., and now Dr. Ripley. I mean, just to reiterate a couple of the points that you made, Dr. Ripley, I love the fact that you said, challenge crisis with the word, and sometimes we think that it's our intellect or our native intelligence that will bring us through. But I love the fact that, having the word of God so richly embedded in our psyche can actually empower us to be able to handle crisis when it does come. And you gave a perfect example of Jesus, the ultimate leader, really, who we know, from the Bible records, that he spent time with the teachers of the law in the temple. So he was intellectually astute. But he went beyond that when the devil confronted him to actually speak God's word, to handle that crisis. And that is what you've encouraged us to do. And you make the point that, you know, crisis tests the totality of our being, you know, body, soul, and spirit. And therefore, we must be empowered and be equipped in those three spheres of our being to be able to handle crisis. And then I love how you've broken it down into the different stages of crisis, the denial, the containment, and then the scapegoat stage. And you ended really on a fantastic or a positive note where you say, ultimately, as leaders, we have to fix the crisis. There's no point in denying, there's no point in trying to contain, there's no point in trying to play the blame game. Ultimately, as leaders, we have to be solution-oriented. The crisis has to be fixed. And that really is why we're all here today, to learn the principles and precepts of actually fixing the crisis, not to be part of the cadre or cohort of people who can blame or who can protest about situations and circumstances, but people who look or go beyond protesting, go beyond laying the blame at the door of government, the blame of people, at the blame pastors, blame parents who did things to us 25 years ago for where we are today, rather than say, hang on a minute, look, this is my life, this is my situation, this is my community. How can I bring the change, the solution that is required in this situation? So thank you so much for that, Dr. Ripley. That's pretty profound. So our next speaker is none other than the fantastic J.D. Modede, and the topic he'll be covering with us today is how to detect situations that may cause and control crisis situations. I'm sure you've probably heard situations where people will say to you, something's happened in their lives. And when you ask them what happens, sometimes people say things like, I knew something like this would happen. You have to ask yourself the question, if you knew this was going to happen, why then did you continue on the trajectory that actually led you into that situation? But that is a problem of life. So there are situations, there are pointers, they say life or success or failure leaves clues. Therefore, if we can begin to detect those things that can lead ultimately to a crisis and take the steps to avoid them or to mitigate them, then hopefully we'll have a significant reduction in the amount of personal, community, corporate, or national crisis that we face. So to take us further into this, please, Dr. J.D. Modede, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. And I want to say a big thank you to our chairman, Charo Munroe. It's such a great opportunity for this kind of a forum. As you know, ITWLA is to raise leaders, but not just leaders becoming agents of change. We need men and women that become agents of change in our world today. Our world is filled with crisis, and our focus is crisis management. Thank you, Dr. Ripley. That was a fantastic session. And my brother, Yemi, nice to see you. Nice to see you. My focus today is how to detect, situations that may cause or predict crisis. Phil McGraw said this. He said, don't wait until you are in a crisis to come up with a plan for crisis or a crisis plan. Don't wait to get into a crisis. Just like, Yemi, our coordinator, was saying that, look, I knew this was going to happen. What did you do? Another person said this. He said, crises are part of life. Jack Nicklaus. He said, everybody has to face them, and it doesn't make any difference what the crisis is. Crisis is a part of life. And I think from everything that everybody has said, you got to understand, and everyone that's all our network associates and everyone on our broadcast today, we got to understand that crisis is just part of life, and we got to get wisdom to deal with it. Crisis is going to happen. The same thing the scriptures also say, it said, look, in this world, you will suffer many things. That means you go through crisis. However, you got to have a different attitude towards it. Okay, now, and our chairman began to, show to us, and definition of terms is very important so you know exactly what you're dealing with. And I'm just going to top up on that because in order to be able to drive this focus on this session, home. A crisis, Myles Munroe was sharing with us some time ago. That's my mentor of old, and that's my resource. I says a crisis, and I'm going to take it a bit deeper, is a human description of what we have no control over. Now, we describe it as a crisis. Whatever we don't have any control over, any event we don't have any control over, that we seems we have a loss of a sense of hopelessness, we call it a crisis. Or another person, I think John Maxwell said this, he said a crisis is an intense time of difficulty that requires a decision that will be a turning point. Now, that took me deeper into more research. I found out the word crisis also in the Greek concept, that it comes from the word krisis, which means decision or a decisive point, which brings us to the subject of leadership, because leadership will have to be at a decision making at very critical points in our lives. Leaders are men and women that will make decisions. A lot of people are going to, take the back seat while some people are going to make the decision. And that is why this organization exists itself. The UK Department of Business, Innovation and Skills defines crisis like this, which is very interesting. I have to just bring this. An abnormal situation or even perception. Now, perception is very important. I'm going to get to it, which is beyond the reputation of an organization. An abnormal situation. Now, we have leaders on the forum tonight. We have people who are, leaders in government, people in positions and things like that, that will have to deal with this because it will either affect the reputation of the organization. Now, in organization as well, because we're speaking to people in leadership positions, people that are going to be, deploying themselves as leaders in one way or the other. Organizational crisis is one thing that's important. It's a crisis. Organizational crisis is a sudden and unwanted situation that has the potential to threaten the integrity or the reputation of your company, if not handled properly or responded to immediately. Now, some of these things has happened. Lately, we just heard about Mercedes-Benz withdrawing, and having to give some of us some money back lately because they're trying to protect their reputation. There's a situation at hand that's a crisis situation. They describe it as a crisis and is going to affect their integrity. Now, if Mercedes-Benz integrity is affected, then it's going to affect a whole lot of families, a whole lot of people that depend on that organization. So we got to understand that in crisis, we need wisdom to deal with things. It is difficult, however, to predict all crises. However, we still have certain steps that we can take in order to prepare for them. We need to do something. Don't just do nothing. Doing nothing is not an option. Can I say that? So we live in a world filled with crisis. We see the effects of crisis. Now, you got to understand we live in a world right now that there's fear, there's anxiety, there's depression. In the United Kingdom, we've seen a spike of mental health. We've seen a spike of domestic abuse. We've seen frustration. We've seen a lot of worry. A whole lot of things are going crazy. People are going crazy because they do not know what to do. So we need wisdom that will not let us be caught in that web. You should not be caught in that web whereby you're depressed because of the situation around you or you're feeling frustrated. And the key is that you never let any crisis define you, but you define what the crisis is going to mean to you. Can I say that again? You never let any crisis, any situation, any event of life define you, but you define it, and by that way, you will actually be on top of the crisis. A wise king once said, and we've said that in different contexts today, King Solomon said it, he said, to everything there is a season. And when we come into understand that everything in life is a season, so therefore crisis is a season as well, and it will pass. It's just like, sometimes I hear about the hurricane in the Bahamas. But one thing that everybody is they're resolved about is that it's going to pass. And the funny thing is going to pass and he's on his way to the United States. I don't know how that works really, but you guys in the US, you got to deal with that. It's passing by and it's going to go, no matter how long it takes there, but it's still going to go. Okay. And that should make your hope stronger than your fear. That should give you faith, belief, that is stronger than your fears, that you're literally, you don't make permanent decisions in that temporary situation. Okay, so the goal itself is, how do we outlive every season? We need to organize ourselves, organize our families, organize our communities, organize our institutions, our nations, our governments. Unfortunately, I've got to say this, our governments are not organized. And you see, it is revealed in the place of crisis. Nations have to outlive seasons of crisis or seasons of life. As much as we might not have control over a crisis, there's one thing that every one of us has a control over. I think Dr. Ripley touched on it. We have control over our minds, over our thinking. Because By this, we can choose the way we look or we perceive the event. The way you approach the event, the way you see it will determine how you're peaceful or you will live in fear in the midst of it. Your perception, for as a man thinks in his heart, so he said, whatever you see a crisis as, that is what it's going to be. So your thinking is so vital, and that is why you need to keep a healthy mind. You need good information to be fed into your spirit, into your soul. You need to learn a lot of good stuff in order to have a different perspective that will keep you above the situation. As a man thinks in his heart, so it is. You cannot do anything beyond your level of thinking. And that is why I call something the dominion perspective. The dominion perspective is what you got to use to look at a crisis. Number one, you got to see crisis as an opportunity creator. Crisis creates opportunity for creativity. There is nothing that is being created in our world that has not been birthed out of one event that was out of our control. It makes you creative. It makes you think deeper. It will force you. That's why don't count it as as shocking or something like that. Rather, look for the opportunity in it. Most things that we've seen in our world today were produced in the midst of crisis. And therefore, inherent in every crisis are opportunities. If we can change our mindset towards that every time there's a situation, no, there's something hidden in it as well. Look at this current crisis situation, COVID-19. Right now, we saw manufacturers of cars moved on to manufacturing ventilators. That was a good thing or not? I know they've cashed in on it anyway. Some people right now, some of the back end, factories in the UK, forgotten about in Leicester, just close to me by right now, they're producing face masks en masse and making millions and millions of bucks right now. I'm telling you, new business, I imagine, while some other ones are folded up. Crisis does something, it always redistributes wealth anyway, just by the way. Crisis places a demand on our potential. Crisis always the stretch that you have made that you never made. The things that you could have done that you've not done yet. It's untapped strength. Crisis will place a demand on the potential. And you got to understand that you have potent ability of the maker, of the manufacturer, of God inside of you. Crisis is always an incubator for leadership development. Crisis makes you grow. My God, look, personally, I've grown in 4 months. I've grown so much. I opened 3 businesses in the midst of the crisis. I learned so much stuff that I would have looked for other people to do in the midst of the crisis. I learned to do it myself because everybody's locked down and life is got to go on. So crisis tests our, crisis tests our beliefs and convictions. It's one thing for you to say stuff. People say a whole lot of stuff. And I love church folks. They say a whole lot of stuff. God is able. Then crisis comes and they go under the bed. Crisis comes to test your beliefs and your convictions. What are your true convictions? Something is going to test it. And crisis is the place that really, what we call the rubber hits the road. And that's why true leadership is tested in crisis. True leadership is tested in crisis. The crisis doesn't make you a leader, but rather it brings out the quality person that is inside of you. And people can, we can all see the same thing. But we got to have a different perspective. You remember the Exodus? They were going to just check the land that they've been given. 12 leaders went there. 12 leaders were sent there to spy the ground. 10 saw something. 2 saw the same thing. They saw the same time, the same assignment, and they came back with 2 different reports. Some see crises and some see opportunities. Now, listen, our world is a pandemic world. Can I show that to you? I was going through the stats yesterday. The current COVID is just one of the many pandemics that we're going through. Flu deaths in 2020, I'll give you some stats, is over 300,000 right now as at yesterday. Abortions in 2020 is over 25 million. Babies' destinies that's been destroyed, that has died. HIV infected only in 2020 is 42 million. Deaths of HIV is over 1 million. Cancer deaths is over 4 million, almost 5 million. Malaria deaths, listen to this, is 590,000 just in this year. 25% of that is only in West Africa itself. Hunger, just hunger daily, is 29,000. We have a pandemic world. We live within a pandemic. So we're not preparing for a pandemic is foolishness. Listen to this. You should not be surprised about a pandemic. You should not be surprised by a crisis. Crisis is part of life. And your maturity is measured by your response to crisis. Myles says that. He said, close scrutiny will show that most crisis situations are opportunities to either advance or stay where you are. Now, let me give you a few keys, principles to help detect crisis, because once you understand crisis that is all part of life, then You cannot but understand how best to manage it in whatever form, whatever industry. There's, life crisis. There's family crisis, health crisis, governmental crisis, financial crisis, all manner of crisis. But predicting crisis will help to protect and reduce the impact of damages a crisis might have on our organization, on our community, on our nations. Number one key to detect crisis is preparing and planning. Taking control of what has happened before it engulfs the organization. A lot of times we don't prepare. People don't prepare. In your family, you don't prepare. Personally, we don't prepare. We don't prepare for financing. We don't prepare for our nation. COVID-19, they've been talking about, in fact, coronavirus. What I learned about it is that it's always existed. COVID-19 was a new strand they found since 2019. We started running around and we call it the Chinese virus. Oh, please, the Chinese virus. I'll give you a very good example. Taiwan is 150 kilometers from China. Literally, it's just part of China. Taiwan, in the midst of this pandemic, has suffered only about 5, 6, 7 deaths and 300 infections, because Taiwan prepared from the last time they had a pandemic and a crisis. They used that to prepare. Either a pandemic was going to come or not, they prepared for eventualities. So when this hit, they kicked in what they prepared. Planning to manage for crises and issues is the key to our survival. Very, very key. Everything is a season. Plan for the next season. You can't wait for winter to plan for winter. You plan for winter in the summer months. You plan for bad financial season in the buoyant season. Remember the guy called Joseph? Joseph gave them a program for a country that was about to be hit with a crisis. What did he do? He did something. He didn't just interpret the dream and then ask, who can do this? The guy literally created his job. So he prepared in the buoyant season for the famine season. In the famine season, listen, people go through famine season, but why you do not know that they have a famine season is because of what they did in the buoyant season. So a lot of times we never prepare, we wait. Now we know the Bahamas, we know the Caribbean countries are in the midst, in the zone where there's what? There's hurricane. You need to prepare for that. That's why they have a different building code. They have different things to sell there that literally can make your house secure in the midst of the hurricane. Literally, I saw something about windows that they're making it. They like, bomb-proof or, things like that, that literally, if a wind hit the windows, it will not go through, because that's the first place that the water gets into your house. We got to prepare. We got to plan for those kind of places, because without planning, you cannot effectively manage the situation of crisis. Plan for bad financial season. Plan for winter. Plan for seed time in the harvest. Sometimes we eat all the harvest. So people have midlife crisis, old age crisis. They have identity crisis. All this. Oh my God, it's endless. There's just crisis everywhere, but we never make plans for it. Listen, you're not going to have the energy you have right now. You're not going to remain young. Some people, they keep on living like they're living. They're going to be like that forever. You got to prepare for your own life. I'm talking to somebody out there. Look, it's driving me crazy. I'm tired of listening to the news. Current crisis was known before it came. Without planning, you cannot effectively manage a sudden crisis. Planning enhances effective management of resources that is available to us. Taiwan is a good case study. Listen. Do we prepare our body to handle sudden attacks? Listen, in the midst of all this, I found something in the midst of what the scientists are saying, that this crisis, one of the key ways that you will survive it is by your immune system. Now, if you do not prepare your body well, that they literally we're designed to be able to take the many different attacks over our lives by our immune system. But now we dump a lot of junk on it and we expect situations will come and we're okay. No. We need planning, we need preparation, we need to empower our minds. Can I go on quickly because of time? Number 2, key.
You are definitely out of time.
Am I out of time? Oh my God. I thought you said it was 15 minutes.
I'm sure the audience are just...
I'll just run through the points for you. Number 2, you got to evaluate. Evaluate. Everything in life that you don't evaluate will become a problem. You got to evaluate every day, evaluate what you do, evaluate your life. Evaluate. Number 3, you got to put effective management process in place. I'm talking about, putting risk assessment. Whatever you're doing right now, is there any risk that you got to look out? Because there might be warning signs that you're ignoring. If you ignore the warning signs, a crisis will hit you suddenly. You know, empower your inner man, empower the leader in you. Crisis does not make you, but reveals who you are. Also, demand of yourself or your team or your community creativity and innovation. Don't wait till a problem comes for you to think innovatively or creatively. Very, very important. Always put something in place. You know, IBM refused to think quickly. Microsoft went ahead of them and IBM ran into a crisis. Look at ways of simplifying. Whatever you're doing right now, begin to look at ways of simplifying it. Because if you study it, you can see there's a crisis about it, because some of the things that you're doing is going to be irrelevant. Maximize whatever you have in your hand. So ride over crisis, please get ready, plan, and I tell you, you will never be a victim of crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, absolutely brilliant. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what can I say? You've heard the fantastic Dr. Jide himself. Well, I think you certainly made a point very, very articulately about the need for us to plan and prepare for crisis. I love the point you made that you never prepare for winter in winter time. You prepare for winter in the summer months. And I think that's something that all of us really need to embrace. And in the world of business, there's a principle called business continuity planning, which ensures that you have thought very robustly about every possible scenario that can impact on your business. We think about, what happens if your computer systems go down? What happens if the internet system fails? What happens if, some of your key personnel, suddenly become unavailable for whatever reason? What happens if the building in which you're holding your business collapses? So you think through all potential scenarios and begin to put in place mitigating factors to ensure that you can recover very quickly from that kind of a crisis. And I believe that is a principle that we all need to adopt in our personal lives, in our communities. So just as we have business continuity planning, there are community leaders who are thinking about community continuity planning. Are there churches that are thinking about church continuity planning, just in case some of the factors that are required are necessary for you to continue to thrive in the midst of a crisis kick in? In fact, this COVID situation has been one that has revealed how well prepared many of our churches are. Because when they could no longer go physically into their premises to host their church services, it's almost overnight, many of their congregations fell apart, which reflects that they haven't really thought through all the various dimensions of their operations and how they run. And yet in the midst of this, there are many, many churches that are beginning to thrive because they have positioned themselves effectively through technology to be able to handle this situation. I love the point you made about crisis placing a demand on our potential. I think oftentimes a lot of people do not really understand the greatness that lies on the inside of them. Someone once said that the difference between carbon and diamond is pressure and time. And many people have not allowed the pressure of the situation or the circumstances they face to actually refine their giftings, so that the carbon that's on the inside of them actually becomes diamond that can sparkle. And so I would enjoin every single one of us who are listening today to begin to look at the carbon that's on the inside of you and see how you can allow the pressure of these current circumstances that we're facing to bring the best out of you, to become the diamond that needs to sparkle and shine forth in this season and beyond. Now, we'll be going into a few, answering the questions that you've asked. May I remind you, please, if you've asked a question on the chat, please move them into the question and answer session. But before we do that, I just want to add a few additional thoughts really to some of the ideas that Myles, Junior, Dr. JD, Dr. Ripley, that you've shared. I have a model that I use when I'm speaking to people about how we engage in dealing with crisis. And it's a very simple model that I call SPRING. So if anyone is writing down, just write SPRING, S-P-R-I-N-G. And it's an acronym. And S there stands for strategic clarity. So when a situation happens, we need to have strategic clarity. We need to define clearly, articulate clearly what exactly the challenge is, what has happened. We don't go into denial. We don't try and hide what has happened, but we surface the issues. The point that JD made earlier was about the fact that crisis happens oftentimes because we aren't prepared for it. So if that is the situation, the clarity should come to highlight to us that it is the lack of planning that has brought us to this situation. I often say that crisis happens for one of two reasons: a failure to plan or a failure to learn. A failure to plan or a failure to learn. Because someone once said that there is nothing new under the sun. Therefore, if the crisis has happened before, why haven't we learned from that? So that's a failure to learn. What about a failure to plan? With the best will in the world, there are some situations in life that are emergent, but yet we can develop a certain type of resilience personally and organizationally that enables us to handle situations. We may not have encountered that particular scenario before, but because we have processes in place as an organization or as a church or as an individual or as a family, because we have processes in place that says, if this kind of a situation happens, this is what we're going to do. It enables you to be able to weather that storm more effectively. And therefore, strategic clarity is very, very helpful. The P there is what I call process design. Every situation in life has a process for you to be able to handle it. Oftentimes, what I call a crisis, if I come to, say, Chiro, he might just listen to that situation and say, hang on, that's not a crisis. You do A, B, C, D, and Bob's your uncle, as they say, and you have a solution. You go to someone like Dr. Ripley, who has, over 40 years of experience in ministry. Oftentimes, people who are young in the Christian ministry, they say, oh, I have this problem, I have a crisis, in quotes. And you take that to someone like Dr. Ripley, and you enumerate what the problem is, he'll say, hang on a minute, that's not a crisis. All you need to do is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and by the time you emerge at the other end, you have a solution. Because through their experience over the years, they have put in place a process, a mechanism for handling most of the situations that others would call a crisis. Okay, so a process design. What processes do you have in place for you to be able to handle the different kinds of situations you face in life? The R there stands for resource allocation or resource reallocation. What kind of resources do you have to be able to handle the situation? Lebanon, as we know, just went through a tragedy, okay? One of the things that they're saying right now is that it will cost them almost $15 billion or more to be able to handle the crisis that they're facing. Now, sometimes what you find out is that the problem is not a lack of resources, it's a lack of resourcefulness. So sometimes it's not so much as do we have the financial resources, it's sometimes more of do you have access through resourcefulness to the resources that you need. The truth of the matter is this: every resource that we need to handle every crisis already exists on the planet. So the question is, how do we access that resource? What resourcefulness comes into play for us to be able to access it? Someone whom you know, or someone knows someone who has access to every resource that you need in your current situation. So that's resource allocation. I stands for innovation. I stands for innovation in the sense that you cannot solve a problem at the same level of thinking at which that problem was created. And therefore, we must be willing to innovate. We must be willing to look at new ways of solving old problems. As JD rightly pointed out earlier, this is not the first time we're having a pandemic. This is not the first time we're having a crisis, a health crisis around the world. He spoke about malaria, he spoke about AIDS, he spoke about the kind of health challenges we're having around the world. The question now is, what new ideas are we bringing into play to enable us to resolve the current crisis and the ones that will happen in the future? Now, N is for network. We must be willing to tap into the different networks that we have to enable us to resolve our challenges. You know, there's a saying that no man is an island. Sometimes there are communities who try to overcome crises by themselves, rather than look beyond their own oikos, their own little circle, as it were, to resolve their crisis. This COVID-19 pandemic, I think, has revealed to pretty much every nation that we need each other. Therefore, how do we leverage the networks that God has placed in our lives to be able to handle the situations that we face? If you're a church, sometimes it's not just being able to pray that is the answer to your crisis. Sometimes you need to tap into business networks to be able to provide you with solutions. Sometimes you need to be able to tap into medical networks to help you resolve your crisis. If you're a business, it's not just your business acumen sometimes that you may require to enable you to resolve your challenge. You may need to tap into the spiritual dimension. Speak to your pastor, speak to your church, speak to people in a different sphere. They're part of your network who can give you ideas and insights to help you engage and resolve your crisis. What networks do you have, and how well are you leveraging your network to arrive at solutions? And finally, the G stands for what I call galvanized, focused, intentional action. There's no point in complaining bitterly about situations that you refuse to do nothing about. Therefore, every leader is called to be a change agent who brings action, the impetus of action to bear on the challenges we face. In some of our nations, one of the things that I find quite fascinating is the fact that many are relying on the government to be the solution. Meanwhile, there are clusters of people who can come together in the community to help each other, to help others in the community who don't have the resources that they have to be able to together overcome the crisis. So how do we, as change agents, as individuals, as churches, as businesses, if you own a business, for instance, what have you done to be able to help your community through this COVID situation? So what action have you taken as a business? What action have you taken as a church? What action have you taken as an individual to help those less fortunate to overcome the current challenge that we're facing? And so that simple model I have found works in almost every situation of crisis that people have brought to me. Spring, strategic clarity. P, process design. R, resource allocation or reallocation. I, innovation. N, leveraging your network. And G, galvanized action. I hope this helps. Add this to your arsenal of tools to overcome crisis in your present and in the future. So let's handle the questions that we have. The first question, I think it's been addressed in a number of ways by our different speakers at different points. Is by Gerald Manis. Thank you very much for your question. It says, what virtues are there for mentally getting through a crisis? I would ask Chiro to answer this question because you definitely are well suited and qualified to answer this question. Please, Chiro.
Yeah, so this is a great question. I think it's something that we all deal with when we go through a crisis. The first thing we need to do when dealing with life as individuals is we need to expect things not to go the way we plan them to go. We need to expect crisis to happen. You know, I remember when my dad and his brother died. That was, I say this all the time, that I vividly remember that period of my dad's life because I physically saw him having a difficult time dealing with his brother's death. And it was something that I've never seen him, you know, deal with death like that before, even have a situation where I saw it affecting him. And he and I had, you know, a few conversations on it, and he would just tell me how, you know, he just wasn't prepared for, you know, his brother dying, you know, because his mother had died prior to his brother dying. And, you know, he handled that because obviously I think he had a chance to prepare for her death. But his death, I don't think he really mentally prepared for. And after he died, you know, I remember him always referring to, you know, preparing for, you know, persons around him to not be here anymore. So he would say that he buried my mother, you know, 1,000,000 times in his head. He buried me or my sister 1,000,000 times in his head. And it's all about expectations, right? It's all about preparing yourself mentally. And I think mental preparation is a very important step that we have to take when we're speaking about preparing for dealing with crisis. I know before my parents died, the first time I thought about not having my parents with me was, I think, maybe a year prior to them passing. So sometime in 2013, I think it was, I was having a conversation with a friend, and they asked me, you know, you're doing this and you're working with your dad or whatever, but have you ever thought about what would happen if your dad wasn't around? And to be quite honest with you, the question scared me because I wasn't even prepared for the question, right? So the question presented a crisis for me. But sure enough, after that point, you know, I started to really visually see, you know, what life would be like, or try to think what life would be like if my parents didn't pass. I mean, if my parents passed, or if my father passed. And sure enough, you know, a year later, you know, a year and a half later, whatever the time period was, that reality hit me. And I think I was able to, and even though I don't think I was fully prepared mentally, the thought process of that was started a year and a half prior to, I think, assisted me in dealing with that unexpected crisis. So mental preparation, I think, is important. And secondly, like Pastor Jide said, and I think everyone has been saying today, planning. We must plan. We have to plan and prepare for the unexpected. That's the only way that we can make it. And if you look at, you know, we've been talking about winter and summer, right? You don't buy a winter coat last year, and then once winter is finished, you throw your winter coat away, right? You expect winter to come back around. You know winter's going to come again. You're not sure how cold it's going to be next winter. You're not sure if you would need to buy an additional layer of covering for the following winter, but you're preparing yourself for what is expected, for the season that is coming. And we need to be just like that in life. We're not sure exactly what the event is or how intense it's going to be, but mental preparation is important, and then preparing and planning for the unexpected is also important. So that's my recommendations for that question. I hope I did a good job answering that for you.
Thank you very much, Chiro. Really appreciate that answer. Great. And thanks, Gerald, for asking the question once again. The next question is, this is to Dr. Ripley. Can you very briefly enumerate the stages of crisis again, just the 4 or 5 stages you mentioned, very quickly?
Yeah, certainly. Number one, the first stage is denial. And of course, we're not talking about a river in Egypt. It's when people refuse to believe that there's an existing crisis. Secondly, was containment. And that is basically especially on the leadership side, not getting stuck in a rut about passing the buck or that type of thing and pretending that that situation that it does not exist. 3, I talked about blaming and shaming. There's a natural tendency, especially in personal crises and crises that might be a little bit lesser than, say, the global scale, to affix blame, even though people will do it at any level, but it's best to avoid that. And then the 4th point I was making was the scapegoat stage. Who's going to take the fall for the crisis? Who's the person that's going to end up taking all the weight and the blame? And that's an easy situation to fall into. And then, of course, the final point is getting the crisis fixed. That is this determination, decision you want to make right from the beginning. As we have all concurred, crisis occurs and happens to us all. It's a continual thing. It is seasonal, depending on the crisis. But at the end of the day, we want to find a pathway to a solution for that. And there you go.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ripley. Great. So, Alina McQueen, Motong, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Your question is, where do you start in planning and preparing for a crisis before the actual eventuality? Where JD, please fill that for us.
Okay, where do you start in planning and preparing? You start now. You know, Dr. Myles once said something, I'll never forget this. He said, look, whatever you're going through today started yesterday. He said, so for you to decide what is going to happen tomorrow, say start now. You can't wait to start immediately. Start now. You know, immediately. That's when you start. Don't wait for anything. Don't wait for anything, any news. No, don't wait for, you know, any governmental policy. Just start now, immediately. Now is the appropriate time. It can't be any other time now. Prepare, you know, just like what Charlie said just now was so powerful. You know, I tell you one thing Dr. Myles taught me. He taught me to prepare for death. That literally over my time of relationship with him, I got the hang with death. Death is not something that I feel is a negative. So I talk about death all the time. A lot of people don't plan for death. They start thinking, oh, no, I'll talk about later. You know, I'll plan for it later. So we continue to postpone it. Literally, wherever there's life, death is present. So you got to plan for death now, today. So time to start planning is now.
It's now. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Then question from Adebayo Temenu. How do you navigate or survive a crisis under such hostile and suffocating environment? I think we probably need a bit more context to your question, Adebayo, when you say hostile and suffocating environment. Well, I think pretty much what most of our speakers have said will pretty much answer your question. First of all, you plan, you prepare, you put in place the mechanisms that ensure that you can survive. You leverage the network, like I said earlier. The situation you're facing right now, somebody has faced that situation before. They may be in your environment. If they're not, well, you can reach out to us in ITWLA. We are a family of leaders with networks in over 40 countries around the world. So connect with us, and I'm sure someone in ITWLA will be able to support you through the crisis that you're going through, and we'll certainly be able to help you navigate it. Now, Samita Ferguson, I love your question. Thank you very much for asking the question. She says, during these moments of crisis, how can the church reshape its methodology without watering down the gospel? Yes. Well, Dr. Ripley, Dr. JD, senior pastors, you wanna field that question?
Okay, listen. Unfortunately, you know, the church, you know, it's a bit of concern. I must say, I'm part of the church. I serve within the church as well. Context. However, I don't believe that the church is prepared itself very well for some of the things that is happening in the world today, unfortunately, and this is where we need to now begin to evaluate what we're doing, because some of the teachings that we're giving to people is not enough to prepare them for life itself. ends, we need to go back to the original context of what the church is supposed to do. What is the message of the church? What is the message of Jesus Christ? We need to go back. Once you go back to the original message of the church, which is the message of Jesus Christ, because he said, I will build my church. So he built his own church. That means that suggests to us that they're different other churches. But he built his church and he gave it his message. It's the message of the kingdom. Now, when a church has the message of the kingdom, it prepares you for everything of life. Now, some people, there's one thing I don't teach about personally, and I know there's a lot of people logged in here all over the world. I don't necessarily teach about rapture because I don't think it's necessary to teach about it when you teach the kingdom, because you will not learn to live in the kingdom when you get to the kingdom. So when you become a kingdom citizen, you're already qualified, you're already preparing those who will go. So why talk about rapture? It is not necessary. You only scare people because you're going to get people in church. So then they wait for a few years and say, this thing is not happening. Then they get tired and they go. You get it? So the message of the kingdom literally is how to operate with the context of a country, a divine country. Literally as well, when issues of death come, it's not an issue to you because either you live or you die, you win, God wins all the time. Absent from the body, present with the Lord. Hey, you're on the mission. He sends you on the mission. You're on that assignment. If you focus on that assignment, it will preserve you. That's the message. You lose focus on that assignment, you don't need time because you're in time for its purpose. Now, you lose focus of your assignment, then why should you have time? So people pray for all these blessings all this time. People look into many things that they're trying to do that God is looking and everyone's thinking, what is this? So the church needs to get back to the original message. It's the message of the kingdom of God. That's all the church needs to do. If we're kingdom citizens, it's just like American citizens. A problem happens, in Africa anywhere or any part of the world, and you have American citizens there. You know what America is going to do? America is going to go in there and get the people out and take them back home. The same way, if God be for you, who can be against you? He'll pick you up and deliver you. So the message of the church needs to go back to the original message. And it's a kingdom message. Check it out through the scriptures. Check it through the gospel. You will see the message Jesus taught, he preached, and he explained. 3 things that Jesus, check what he said, check what he taught, check what he preached. It's a thread of a kingdom.
Thank you very much, JD. Really appreciate that. Dr. Ripley, anything else you'd like to add to that?
Well, I'll tell you what, after JD speaks, there's not much left to add. Listen, he read up so many good things. And, to his point, that is the deal. The message should never change. It never changes. That's what the Bible says. There's 3 witnesses that says that God doesn't change. And I think it's 2 Corinthians 13, 1 or 2 that says, let everything be established in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. And so through the witness of Malachi, I am the Lord, I change not. Through the witness of the writer of Hebrews, Jesus Christ, the same yesterday and today and forever. Through the witness of James, that in God there's no variableness, neither shadow of turning. What all that says is that, look, no matter what crisis is going on, pandemic or however you define it, God's word never changes. The important message is to teach the people of God, stick with the word, stay with the word, speak the word, do the word. Because when everything else goes down, whatever it does, listen, the word is still going to be around. Heaven and earth, Jesus said, may pass away, but my word is not going anywhere. And so you want to get people focused on the word. The message and the gospel of the kingdom is that word. The other thing is this. A wise sage once told me years ago, he said to me, Brother Ripley, don't ever be afraid of change. And then he said something else. He said, most people never do it. That was profound, simple, but profound. But change is the one constant in life. We can expect change in this sphere. God doesn't change, and I'm thankful for that because that makes him a reliable source, a center of gravity for us all. But we should not be afraid of change. And by the way, what JD was saying about reference to death, that's a lot of problem with people because they're afraid of it. They haven't studied it out of the word enough to understand what it really is. That is a change, okay? It's really nothing more than a change. I know that it leaves, shall we say, grief and sorrow, particularly in its wake. And I'm not at all trying to downplay it and the impact and significance that it has. But one thing there's a couple things. As a pastor, let me just address this. As a pastor, at every memorial service I've ever done, or I do, especially in this recent season, is I remind people that what remains of the people that have passed on is all of us left behind. You know, when I think about when Jairo's parents passed away, look, let me tell you something. Look at him now. Look at Charissa. Look at all the rest of us in ITWLA. We're what remains of Myles and Ruth Munroe, of Richard Fender, of those pilots and the other passengers on board that aircraft, because they all had some impact in our lives, whether they said a word, whether we sat together and had lunch, broke bread together. They left something with us that we will carry with us for the rest of our lives. And we continue to pass on those things. So I'm just saying, the Bible says there's no need to be afraid of death. It's called an enemy. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. So don't be afraid of change. As my friend said, most people never do it, but it is the one constant in this world. Another thing too, God has given us gifts, abilities, and talents. Look, your gift is from God is designed to sustain you. Dr. Munroe, one of the most profound teachings I'd ever heard him say was when he said, you know, God gives you a gift, you refine that gift, and then he said, you turn around and serve it to the world. That blew me away. And when I look out there in the world today, and a lot of times we look at people, well, they're singing the blues, they're singing jazz, or they're doing this or doing that. You know what they're doing? They're utilizing their gift, and they're turning around and they're serving it to the world. And you know what's happening? Their gift is sustaining them. When people will pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to go see you perform, hear you sing, hire you to be their architect or whatever service provider, you have perfected and you have refined a gift. And when you deploy it, that is when you use it. See, if you don't use it, you end up losing it. But if you use it, it will certainly sustain you. So that's what I would say. But yes, church must stay on point with the message of the kingdom of God and keep teaching that and preaching that and demonstrating that. And no matter what kind of crisis you're in, that word will always chart a navigable way out of any crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ripley. The next question, actually, I'll revisit the question that Adebayo asked earlier when he asked about how do you navigate crisis in such a suffocating environment. The context it provides says, when you live and work in the third world, the self-preparations against inevitable crisis can be exacerbated by the failure of political leadership because you exist within a system. So if that system is bankrupt and defective, you get hit from both ends. So leading on from that, how then do you navigate the crisis situation?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I think for us, we need to have a mentality. You know, the word says we are in this world, but not of this world, right? So we operate within a different world, if you will. So even though we're in a system, I think we have been given ability enough to navigate our way through the system. And I think Dr. Ripley spoke on it just now, where, you know, the gifts and talents that we have, where it sustains us regardless of the situation that we're in. When we're in a crisis, or when we're in a system that we feel is failing us, we need to find the value that we can bring to that system, or the value that we can bring within that system. People are attracted to productivity, right? So the more you produce, as frequent as you can produce something, create value for yourself, answer a question, solve a problem. I think these are the things that we should be focused on when we're dealing in a crisis. But more specific to your question, when we're in a system that we don't think is advantageous to us. So we need to, I think the mentality needs to be, how can I create value for myself in this system? What can I do to enhance my visibility? What can I do to be a bit more productive? Because like I said, people are attracted to productivity. So, you know, don't focus on the outcome, right? Focus on the process. Focus on what do you need to do as an individual? How can you better yourself? How can you read more books, take more training programs in an organization like ITWLA and get plugged in with, you know, individuals like the speakers that we have today, and hundreds of more individuals who, you know, we've come together for this particular purpose, for when we go through things like this on a global level, we have a network that we can plug into and we can feed off of, and we can operate in where we can help sustain each other. So, you know, even if you're in a system that you feel isn't working, find the value that you can create for yourself. Find the space in that system where you can become productive, where you can advance your skills. You can find even more potential, more skills, more abilities that you have that you may not have been using before, but just get a little more focused in becoming a bit more creative and advancing the value that you have for yourself.
Thank you very much, Chairo. Really appreciate it. Couple of questions that ties into the acronym I gave earlier. Hubert Edwards says, what does the P stand for in spring? If you check the chat, I already wrote that in there, but for those who didn't see that, the P stands for process design. And essentially, it's taking a detailed, structured approach to putting in place the mechanism for crisis resolution. So rather than going at it sort of flapping around in the air, just trying to address it as a crisis, you have to develop solutions in a structured manner that positions you to be able to handle that crisis effectively. Because one of the things that happens, I always say that within every crisis, there are a couple of components. One is the emotional component. The second is the time component. And the third is the event itself component. Oftentimes what happens is people home in on the emotional component and they become either fearful or they become, how do you call it? They lose focus. And those two kind of emotions make it very difficult for you to handle a crisis. Someone once said that when emotion rises, intellect reduces. Okay, so the key really in process design is to ensure that you harness your emotions, you bring them into focus, and then you develop a plan of action. That is what the process design is. You develop a plan of action through that process to enable you resolve the crisis. Okay. Therefore, when you have a structured process in place, it helps reduce the amount of experimentation or adverse experimentation that go through. That's what the P stands for. And then the G stands for galvanized, focused, intentional action. This is action that is focused on arriving at solutions. The issue of action is about using energy productively. Oftentimes, a lot of people use their energy in complaining. They use their energy in protesting. To address the question that Adebayo asked earlier, which Chairo answered so effectively. Oftentimes, people waste a lot of energy trying to figure out what the government ought to be doing or what the community leaders ought to be doing, forgetting that you yourself, you are a leader, you are a change agent. So rather than worrying about what that ineffective political leadership in your particular nation is doing, you should be asking the question, what am I going to do as a solution-oriented change agent in this situation? And you'd be amazed what you can do to bring change in that particular environment. Okay, so I hope that helps.
One second, you may think you're running out of time, and I want to adhere to the time period that we gave for the session.
For the session, indeed.
Yeah, so I guess I want us to close out. I want to thank our speakers, Dr. Jide, Dr. Ripley, and Yemi for being a part of this first digital forum. This is the first of of 4 that we're doing. I hope that the information that we've shared in this first forum has been informative for you, and you've learned something from this session. I know I have. I think that spring acronym that Yemi talked about, I'm going to apply that to the planning that I do during these times. Jide, the information and the suggestions that you gave, as passionately as you gave them, I think all of us can attest to the wealth of knowledge that you've shared today, and I want to thank you for that. Dr. Ripley, the same, the amount of information that all of you gave, I'm very appreciative of it, and I'm sure that everyone that attended is appreciative as well. For those of you who are asking, if you want to get plugged in or you want to communicate with us here at ITWLA, you can reach out to us using the email address ITWLA@bfmmm.com. That is ITWLA@bfmmm.com. You can send us an email. We'll send a response out to you so that you can get connected with our organization. The video for this session, we're going to make live. Everyone that has been a part of this session, those who weren't able to make it, we're going to send you the link that you can watch this video through. That's going to come to your email, the email address that you would have registered with when you registered for this forum. Okay, so we'll make all of that available. Thank you, gentlemen. I'll allow each of you 30 seconds to give a closing remark before we leave today. But thank you, everyone that tuned in. I appreciate you spending the morning or the evening or the afternoon, wherever you are in the world. You know, this pandemic has really connected us technologically, right? And we see the advancement and the things that we are able to do, even if we're stuck at home in our countries. So thank you on behalf of ITWLA as the chairman. I want to thank you guys, and I'll leave the last words for my fellow panelists. 30 seconds, Jay.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you for having the vision to create this forum. We're looking forward to the future segments of this. And from what I can see happening on the chat line, I believe that many are looking forward to it as well. It looked like I saw someone there, or a few people that were interested in becoming a part of the organization. So we'll have a means to reach out to them, and I certainly encourage them to get involved. I just thought about that last thing, and Yemi and you did a great job answering that question. Hey, whatever disturbs you may be a clue to whatever your assignment or mission is. I'll leave it there. Thank you. God bless you.
Jide.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. This is ITWLA on the move to raising leaders and transforming leaders to agents of change. This is our mission, and I want as many people to get on board. Yemi, thank you so much for such a time as this. One thing I want us to all know and take on board is that crisis creates opportunity for creativity and innovation. Don't ever forget that. So don't be scared of it. Don't lose your mind. Don't lose your head. Take advantage of it. God bless you.
Yemi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Dr. Ripley and Dr. Jide. And thank you to all the guests, you know, the attendees, really. I'll simply enjoin you to say, by saying, please apply what you have learned. The last letter in my acronym is G, galvanized, intentional, focused action. There's no point in having spent 2 hours with us, gleaning all these insights and wisdom, and then go back home and continue business as usual. Our passion, our vision is that we apply this and you actually bring the change that your family, your business, your church, your community so desperately needs. Please apply. And when you do, we will see you at the top.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Again, thank you for joining. See you guys in a few weeks, where we'll come to you again with our second forum. We'll have a number of different speakers digging a little deeper on our topic of crisis management. But until then, good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world.
Bye, everyone.
All right, everyone.